Welcome back to The Point with Mick Rich. I'm here with my good buddy Joel. Joel, great to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Mick.
Hey, you and I met about a year ago, year and a half ago,
Mhm.
out on the campaign trail. I met you through Marty. You came over, we chatted, and Marty said, Mick, here's a fellow rugby player.
Yeah.
Then, you and I started working together on the campaign
Mhm.
for 2020. We traveled the state together. We got to know one another.
Mhm.
A couple things I thought were interesting was, number one, you're a musician, am I
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Mhm.
And then you a songwriter,
Yeah, I do several things in music,
which
started.
are
Well, actually, I got my degree at this university in Chicago for talent and media management focused in the music industry. So incorporate a lot of marketing and public relations, so on and so forth. And I was actually doing that as a vehicle to maybe eventually push my own music, but I got a lot of great experience working with various artists signed to RCA, Sony Records, whatnot, out of college. So that's kind of my beginnings.
so if I want to start like recording music,
Hmm.
let's say
Hmm.
I love that song, I left my heart in San Francisco.
Right?
So we go what's the term, do it tape,
You do recording, yeah.
do a recording.
Yeah.
So we'll do a recording together. You could play the guitar.
Uh,
You play the guitar?
I do play the guitar,
Guitar.
but I would need to hear your demo first before I commit to that. So,
Oh, I want just so everybody understands. I do not sing,
Yeah.
right? And even in Happy Birthday, I keep my voice kind of quiet.
just harmonize, right?
So you're a musician.
Mhm.
You went to Italy, I mean to Spain, right?
Yeah, I went to Spain top of the year to work on a music project there, and then and everything was going well. Actually, I was going to my plan was to actually do a few shows out there in Barcelona as well. When I came back, I was still actually working with you, so I was waiting,
Right.
to see if there'd be time. And of course, COVID hit, and I like
Oh.
that shut down basically because I didn't really want to just record songs for the sake of recording songs. I like touring and playing live.
I can understand
Mhm.
that. I just love being on the campaign trail,
Mhm.
just chatting with folks.
Yeah.
Then you're a rugby player.
Yeah, so I play rugby on a men's club in Albuquerque, Albuquerque Aardvarks. And
Okay.
anyone knows about rugby, it's like a lot of people call it, it's like things football without pads, but
Right.
it's pretty much just controlled chaos.
I remember I played rugby in college, and
Mm.
our coach was from New Zealand, and he
Oh,
said,
okay.
football is a ruffian sport. And
Mhm.
then he said soccer is a ruffian's gentleman sport,
Mhm.
and then rugby is a gentleman's sport.
Right, yeah.
And so I'm not
Ruffian
quite, I
play,
never feel that way playing rugby
well, it's
now.
ruffians. It's a ruffian sport played by gentlemen.
Right, okay,
Yeah, that's what we like to
good.
think. Yeah.
And then, so you're doing that, and then you just got off the campaign trail.
Yeah, we just had our general election, and I was campaign manager for Alexis Johnson, who's running
Right.
for U.S. Congress in northern New Mexico. Mhm.
Good. And then at the same time, I noticed that you were doing their Facebook, social media,
Yeah,
and you also did some production of commercial videos.
yeah. So basically, Alexis and I kind of made a decision that we would we're better off just keeping our basically most of the media in-house and focus on marketing,
Okay.
And so basically I was the only steady employee of the campaign. And
Right.
so there'd be times where like, let's do a TV commercial. We have to do a TV commercial. And then uh, we got the script from the consultant and I was just like, this isn't good.
Right.
And then no offense to that, it was just what they just didn't understand New Mexicans like
Right.
Alexis and I did. So
Makes it, tell you
so
what,
we did it
makes a lot.
ourselves.
I can remember they said, we want you, on one of the commercials, they want, Mick, we want you to stand up with your arms crossed.
Mhm.
And I said to them, I said, there is no way in the world I am ever going to do that.
Yeah.
Right. And there are certain things you just say, we're not going to do it. The other item that, that I wanted to ask you about is that you grew up in Illinois.
Yeah, I grew up going back and forth between actually South Bend, Indiana, and Hobbs, New Mexico.
And your mother lives
in Lee County, yeah.
Right, down in Hobbs area.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that, I spent part of my time in South Bend, Indiana, and then when you look at Indiana, like the politics is interesting because Supreme Court Justice this came from Notre Dame, South
Right.
Bend, Indiana. Mayor Pete from South Bend, Indiana, and Mike Pence.
So how
was the
close are
gov-
you with me, with Mayor Pete?
I've seen him out and about a few times,
Okay.
but that's
about as close as you get.
No, I have nothing against him. It's just we
No,
we don't align politically.
No,
So,
I understand. Yeah,
yeah.
I understand that.
Mhm.
So I'm glad to have you on the program, and one of the reasons being is that uh, I'm a Republican, you're a Republican,
Mhm.
and one of the things that I've noticed is, hate to say it, is that the old guys aren't going to let go of the Republican Party until they're dead yet, pry their cold, dead hands off of the, the throttle.
Right.
And so I'm excited to see the next a younger generation, because really how old are you?
I'm in my 30s.
So you're the next generation down
Yeah.
from me,
Mhm.
from what I can say. And so I'm glad to see the next generation of leaders stepping up. And
Yeah, and people that are stepping up, they're not being asked to step up. We see there's a need, right? And so and there's some people kind of in the middle where they kind of want to, they just need the push, Whereas like my candidate, for U.S. Congress, Alexis totally just rose to the occasion. No one even wanted her to do it, but she saw the need.
That's right. Again, I think it goes back. Did you ever read the book called Iron John?
I have, actually.
Right, and he talks about
Mhm.
you can't ask for the key, you can't beg for the key, you have to take the key.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we're talking about, is that if you're standing back and waiting to say, oh, come on board, it's not going to happen. But I can well imagine, I know how I was greeted when I stepped in, but I'm not. So what was your experience as this younger generation stepping up into a leadership role? So were you warmed welcomely, saying, oh, thank goodness, Joel, we're so glad to see you here?
Well,
Or did you have to get your elbows in there like in a scrum in rugby?
Well, the first half of it was like a scrum in rugby, because no one knew I was there in the middle, because I was behind the scenes, just focused, because I didn't want to be so on and so forth. And so then the people that did know me eventually appointed me to campaign manager. And then at that point, they're like, who is this guy? And so then once there's a lot of feeling out. They didn't really know who I was for a while, but they didn't know anything about me. I didn't want them to know anything about me, because I just wanted to focus on the campaign. But then as when push came to shove, they realized I was willing to shove back when it came to disagreement. But I always had this confidence, because I'm like, we're controlling the media, and if you have a good messaging, no one can really speak against you.
And I tell you what, I think we're going to leave it here for this segment. Again, Joel, great to have you here. Welcome back. I have my good buddy here, Joel, and Joel and I were on the campaign trail together. We traveled the state, the two of us in my Ford Explorer.
Yeah.
Covered a lot of territory quickly. So that was your first experience on the campaign trail. What were some of the biggest surprises that you had?
The biggest surprise I had really was, it was funny. I really was surprised on how excited people were at these conventions, and hopeful, and I was like, this is really fun. And it was interesting, because I talked to someone else's campaign manager. I won't, I was working media with you, but talked to someone's campaign manager at that time, and he's like, oh, I hate these things. It's just a big show. And I was just like, well, it's just a big show if that's what you see it as. But this is so many people you can speak with and because I love people and hearing like their takes on things. And that was interesting. Even with the Republican Party, the spectrum of beliefs and values and ideas of how things should be done. That's really surprising.
Oh, right. One of the biggest surprises that, and I'm embarrassed over, that it dawned on me way too late, of the two, what I call the push-pull in the Republican Party. One I call the social libertarians, in that would fall more at one extreme is Gary Johnson. When he was a Republican, he would be what I would call a social libertarian.
Yeah.
And then you have the social conservatives. Over on the other side, more the evangelicals. It's very black and white. Both of those extremes are very black and white, and have a hard time coming together.
Is that
what you said? Yeah,
and the similarities with your campaign and Alexis was that if you had your own independent thought, people really struggled with that. If you had your own independent ideas of how you think things should be done, people struggle with that. And even like the mask thing, right? We're in the mask era.
Right.
Like, I found it interesting. People were saying like, well, it's our right to not wear a mask.
Right.
And then, but if someone was wearing a mask, sometimes, but you should take off your mask. I'm like, well, don't you think it's their right to wear a mask? So sometimes people, they use their ideas to push what they really want, when really there's some flaw into it. So that's kind of what I'm saying, is that people get so stuck in dogma sometimes that they kind of lose what they're saying, but that's all parties. That's not,
Oh, look, I agree with that. I think it's interesting that you use the term dogma, because when we think of dogma, we think about religion.
Yeah.
and dogma of the Catholic Church. I'm just so everybody knows, I'm Catholic, so I'm not pointing my finger at Catholics. But I'm saying, but again, what I find that was interesting is that as I traveled the state with you, and we would talk to people and listen to them, ask them what's important to you, and then to come up with a message that was able to be expressed across the state. And it was challenging to be in events with Republicans and say, this is what I'm standing on, and not change it based on what part of the state you're in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I challenge any state, or specifically Northern District, to have a more diverse district, from Navajo Nation to Clayton to Clovis, Permian Basin to Santa Fe and Metro Albuquerque. It's house. Like it's having your message to be flexible and make sure everyone has their input. It's a real challenge, and the challenge is to make the district understand that there's other people in the district that have needs too.
Yes. I was just, your Alexis's district included Farmington. I was going through a list of cities losing population. I think it was the top 30 in the country. And Farmington was right there.
Wow.
I think they were like in the, I believe, top 10, maybe top 15 of cities losing population, which was, I think,
No, Farmington's primed to be a metropolis if it wanted to be, because they have all the resources. They just need like a railway, but they have people willing to work,
Tell you what, they have people to work. What I liked about Farmington was that it is a blue collar town. And what I mean by a blue collar is that they're willing to do the hard work to earn a living, whatever that may be.
Well, interesting thing about Farmington, that was the first event I went with you to, and that's actually where I met Alexis.
Oh, okay.
And so what's interesting about that, I told Alexis Johnson, it was just offhanded. I only really said one thing to her. I said, Alexis, you should keep this up. You have that it factor. That's all I said to her. And it's very interesting that was like the first event that I went with you, and that's the first time I met her.
You said that was the what again?
The first event that I traveled with you.
What did you say to her? What she was?
All I said to her, being from music industry and managing talent, I said to Alexa, I just want you to know you have the it factor.
It factor.
The it factor, where it's just you see someone, you're like that. There's just certain people you see that they'll be successful in anything they do if they really want it.
And I agree with that. I saw that traveling the state. I was real encouraged to see the number of candidates that were running in CD3, considering how challenging it is for Republicans. So what was the experience out on the Navajo Nation?
Well, the first time we went there, it just turned out that at that moment they were in tribal court about the hemp farms.
All right.
And I'll be honest, it felt like being in Juarez. It felt like being in Juarez, Mexico. Because the local people, the community, were ready to literally burn the hemp farms down.
Oh, no kidding.
With Molotov cocktails, torches, whatever. And if that tribal court did not go the right way, and we stopped and we spoke with someone, and when we spoke with someone, and that's the first I really talked about it, it's not, but we left, and then 30 minutes later, that person got arrested. And then we're like, we probably should get out of here. And there was police everywhere because they were just worried about like an uprising of some kind. I don't know the details, but so that was my first experience. And this is around the Shiprock area.
Right. No, I understand what you're saying. I never got that. I knew it was an issue, but I didn't understand that people were that passionate over it.
And that's the whole point, is that when boots are on the ground, like what's going on, and then, but yeah.
Which goes back to our congressional leaders in Washington. How rarely do they make it back to Albuquerque, to New Mexico, and travel the state to get that impression? It was unbelievable to me what I heard on the campaign trail, or what I heard from our delegates, representatives here. I remember one of them said I was down in Deming and said, this is over the border wall, and they said, this is one of the reps say, if you want to be heard, you're going to have to organize and protest in order to be heard in Washington. And I'm thinking, where's our congressmen? Where's our senators? That's what they're here for. People shouldn't have to organize and protest for their voice to be heard.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, and that's part of why everyone asked what the secret of the campaign was. Of doing as well as we did compared to past. The number one thing is a good candidate.
I
The
agree.
same with the music manager. You can be the best music manager in the world. If it's not a good music artist, then it doesn't matter. And a good candidate was just the main thing. And
So
then
what do you think? Okay, you said a good candidate.
mhm,
What's a good candidate look like?
a good candidate is willing to listen. A good candidate is also a little flexible to actually represent the voice of their district rather than pushing what they want to all the time.
Right.
And now, don't get me wrong, there needs to be some connective tissue there where their beliefs do line up with the district. But at the end of the day, it's what the district wants and what the people of the district wants. And there is a point of leadership too, where because during the COVID thing, one of the reasons that Alexis won because she was the only one actually taking an active leadership role, saying, "This is the resources for COVID. This is the websites to go to, so on and so forth." And everyone else just kind of went to the background. And she was the only Republican voice in New Mexico. In the midst of COVID, actually providing resources.
That's huge.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when we talk about that the COVID-19 crisis was front and center in this election.
Yeah, and then for me personally, that leveled the playing field. My background is media, social media, and marketing, and that's where the fight was. And so.
Good deal. Well, I tell you what I thought was interesting is that you guys did so much with so little.
Yeah.
You could practically do anything with nothing.
That's really what it was. Like being outspent 28-1.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Well, so Joel, you finished up the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
What was the biggest surprise that you had on the campaign? Whether that was on my campaign or Alexis's campaign, what was the biggest surprises?
The biggest surprise it was amazing to see how the voices vary within the party, right? Because I feel the Democrats are a little more like follow the leader. We're all in on this, which is a strength and a weakness because there's not much room for different voices, right?
As I mentioned in the monologue, was that what I see is that you have the elitists saying, "Here's what's good for you,"
Mm-hmm.
and everybody gets on board, and still they march to that drum.
Yeah.
And what I hear you saying is that with Republicans, it's more like jazz,
Yeah.
where the rhythm is broken up,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And
and I think we talked about this before, where there's a shift, and you brought it up. There's a shift where Republicans used to be the one seen as the rich that took advantage of the poor,
right.
But now it's different, where there's the liberal elites rely on the poor to keep them in their positions. Don't get me wrong, I think there's both of that on both sides.
I agree with that.
But I feel the elites see the lowest quintile of the economy as their commodities.
So we'll touch base more on this in the last segment.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I jumped ahead.
But no, that's okay.
Yeah.
But what I hear you say is the surprise is that there isn't a unified voice. And what's good about that is that one voice just doesn't obliterate every voice.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge to that is to unify the people, unify the Republicans, but have a unified message that's out there. And I tell you what, the unified message that I saw in the last campaign was respect New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I talked about it, is it makes you want to go out and pick up trash.
Mm-hmm.
I do say that, and I never could quite figure out who was behind that, but respect New Mexico, I think it's a great thing. It kind of reminds me of Toss No Mas.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm not one to be I'll be honest, it was great, but it missed the mark on allowing the individual candidates to be in the forefront. It was, everyone I felt it was a little dogmatic. Again, that word, because it was good, because it definitely moved the needle, and it got people nominated, it got people in office, and that was great. It was a great beginning. Where it fell short was it didn't allow the individual candidate to shine. And that's the environment and media world that we're in, where we need stars.
So what I'm hearing you say is that what you were expecting the role for the party would be a crucible for the candidate, to have the resources, to have a unifying message, and then allowing the candidates to go out and listen to the constituents.
And they could have featured candidates. They could have highlighted candidates.
Right.
And the thing is, with respect to New Mexico, I followed the Facebook metrics, and Alexis, starting with nothing, got more Facebook engagement week to week than Respect New Mexico, an individual. Now imagine, take the gestalt, the whole is greater than the sums of its
Right.
part, and that's what they missed the boat on. It was too much 1 + 1 + 1, where it's like we need more exponential,
Well,
exponential
again,
approach.
I just don't. So when we look at it, we look at the district that you guys are running in,
Mm-hmm.
northern New Mexico. You touched on it. You have parts of Albuquerque, Sandoval County, Bernalillo, Sandoval. You're working your way up.
Mm-hmm.
You're going right up the
valley,
the Rio Grande
yeah.
Valley. And if we think about it, that is really the Rio Grande Valley was the Camino Real.
Mm-hmm.
That is the immigration from the Spaniards up through Mexico, originating from Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Then you had, for your district and for the other districts except for Bernalillo, CD1, you had immigrants coming across from the east to the west,
Mm-hmm.
and then also from not so much from the west to the east. And then you had the Native Americans and with the Navajo Nation and the Pueblos.
Yeah.
And so for Alexis to be able to come up with a message
Mm-hmm.
to reach the voters
Mm-hmm.
was huge. And for you guys you had what, 125,000? I figured.
Yeah, it's about that. Yeah.
135,000. You ended up with 42% of the.
Yeah, it's
of
the
the
most
vote.
votes ever. It's a bigger population now, but it's the most votes ever for a Republican in CD3.
CD3.
There's actual
And-
hard numbers, yeah.
Right, and you were outspent almost 30 to 1.
Our opponent had $28 million, $2.8 million,
2.8 million.
mostly from out of state. Yeah.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Of course, out of state. So again, it is, when we talk about this, is the elites
Mm-hmm.
saying we know what's good for you.
Yeah, and that's really what it is. And one of the things that I'm very blunt about, we hear the liberals talk about gentrification a lot, but really what the liberal elites are doing, they're doing a gentrification of values, where we have these Hispanic communities that have been conservative, they believe in guns and free speech, freedom of religion, etc. And the liberal elites are coming and gentrifying the Hispanic values in New Mexico. And it's a flat out, I'll say it, white liberal elitist gentrification of values.
Oh, too, I agree with that. I think the other thing I think is interesting on gentrification of areas of urban cities is that in the 60s,
Mhm.
we were doing forced busing, forced integration,
Mhm.
and we're forcing people to do it.
Mhm.
With the gentrification of those communities, this is volunteering people to move into those communities
Mhm.
for a mix. And instead of embracing it and making it work for everybody, it was like fighting.
Mhm.
For,
Yeah, and I don't think
it's in thermodynamics we talk about entropy,
Mhm.
and what we have is that when you fight gentrification, you're fighting the natural tendency.
Mhm.
When you have busing, you're fighting the natural tendency. So what we should be doing is allowing people this ability to enter into different communities.
Yeah.
And again, what we're talking about in New Mexico, I think is huge. In your district that you were, not your district,
Mhm.
but CD3
Mhm.
was huge because it was what we talk about, the melting pot of our country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I actually think that New Mexico. I've traveled. I think New Mexico is one of the least gentrified areas I've ever been in. Just because of the whatnot. And I'm not even I'm actually not even a big fan of that term. It's it's something. It's yes, it's a thing to describe a phenomenon, but I think it's used too much to create divisiveness, right? But I'm using their own word against them when I say
Right.
a gentrification of values. So, but anyway.
And I agree with that. It tears me up to see the values of instead of the party following the values of the people,
Mm-hmm.
they're pushing the values on the people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what was the biggest disappointment that you saw that you go, oh man,
My
can't believe
biggest
we're doing this?
my biggest disappointment was it's got to tread lightly. My biggest disappointment was the kind of the national scene didn't see the potential for Alexis, because right out the gate when she won the primary as an underdog, she was the only candidate in New Mexico to get national interviews. And in being in music, if you get an article in the Rolling Stone, the record label gets behind it, sends out a press release, and it's
Yeah.
like, let's attach rocket ships to this car.
Right.
And Alexis had that car on the national scene. She was in the Financial Times. She's she was in in like featured in the Washington Times, the Lily, XM Radio, Andrew Wilco, and the Republican Party didn't want to get involved for some reason.
And I understand that also at the same way for us.
And so for music though,
Right.
that's what you do. You present something on a silver platter, and the label's like, great, thank you for doing this hard work. We can turn something into this. And I felt like no matter what gold I made.
Welcome back to the Point with Mick Rich. I've got my good buddy here, Joel. I would consider Joel kind of a Renaissance man. He is a musician, rugby player, campaign manager, businessman. So Joel, we talked a little bit about your background. We talked about us working together on the campaign, you working on Alexis's campaign up in CD3.
Mm-hmm.
But today I want to wrap this up with, you see the next generation of political leaders. I look at you in that position, that you're able to set your own path
Mm-hmm.
of what you want to do, your core values. So where do you see this all going? I don't want to talk about just Republican and Democrats, but what I see is we are at a transition in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I talked last night a little bit of that, or maybe it was with my banker I talked about this, is that the magnetic north and south over a few million years flips.
Mm-hmm.
And I see the same thing going true on the political arena, where all of a sudden I'm seeing the values of the parties. The Democrats in the past have always been part of the working man and women party.
Mm-hmm.
Then it became part of the big labor.
Mm-hmm.
And then the labor leaders knew what was good for the workers.
Mm-hmm.
And so where do you see things going?
Well, I got to tell a quick little story. I don't know if I ever told you this. When I was in college, I actually applied to be an intern in the state house, right? And
Which state house?
this was actually Indiana at the time.
Indiana, okay.
And I went there, and I said to them, I'm not going to be a lawyer. I'm not going to school for poli-sci. I said, but I think I have some assets to give in what I'm going to be doing. And it was like a thanks but no thanks situation. And I had kind of forgotten about that, what's so on and so
what
forth.
party was that?
Republican
Party. So,
and then I got it. No, I'm just going to be frank. And then I was like, well, so whatever, because I knew that was not a good chance, whatever, just because I'm not the typical person that they would want to bring in. And then when I looked at all the interns that they had hired, everybody was Caucasian,
Oh, right.
and so, and I was like, but I'm conservative enough to know, well, maybe they were more qualified, right? And so, but what they didn't provide was an outlet for me, or a pathway for me to do what I could. And when we started working together, I had no interest, or it wasn't on my radar to work in politics. And you didn't even know that story, right? And so it was fatalistic, right, that would happen and so anyway, so I'm a prime example of someone that the Republican Party did not identify, but you identified as an individual, right? And so there needs to be more pathways for people that want to do things, not just run for office. They want to work in media. There needs to be pathways where it's like, well, we don't need you for an intern, but you know what? We can move you over here. You're a great asset here. You're a great asset there. Because as it sits right now, it's really hard for people of color to find where it's their voice, because they have to adapt.
Right. So I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
My sister was a volunteer for Sierra Club.
Mm-hmm.
It was out in California. I went up and visited her and her husband.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went up to the Capitol building there in Sacramento.
Mm-hmm.
I sat in on a hearing for the navigability of the Mokelumne River there in California. And I listened to it. At the end of the committee hearing, it ended up with the two sides are going to come together, figure out a compromise, and move forward. And we left there. We bumped into the lobbyist for the Sierra Club. And he said, oh, you were in the hearing? I said, yeah. And he said, well, the two sides are going to come together and work out a compromise. I said, man, were you there? I didn't see you there.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, no, I wasn't there. That was already decided before the hearing.
Mm-hmm.
That probably turned me off the most of politics.
Yeah.
Now, I did do grassroots campaigning for McGovern in high school, but really politics was off the radar screen. But what I found was, and I hear you talk about it being a color issue of...
there wasn't a place.
Right. Right. But my experience was, you're not one of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And more being was,
Well, then, because I prefaced it with like, I'm not going for law,
That's right.
poli
You
sci,
did.
so I knew that I wasn't one of them. From
You weren't one of them,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And I think that, and when I was looking at this, is that I was not someone that fits the mold,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Just like President Trump.
Mhm.
Here was a guy that was a Democrat,
Mhm.
looked at it and said, no way. He supported and contributed to Hillary Clinton,
Mhm.
said, I'm going in a different direction. And here it is. You had those elites
Mhm.
lining up against Trump when he was running in 16. And then here it was. You had many of those same Republicans, and I call them political elites,
Mhm.
lining up in the Lincoln Project
Mhm.
to oppose the president. And what I'm seeing is that either party, they've got to open it up. I'm praying that it's going to be the Republican Party,
Mhm.
open it up and say, man, we have got to open it up, get people involved. I was down out of the Albuquerque area, and I talked with some county leaders,
Mhm.
and I talked to them about our float that we had in 18
Mhm.
in Corrales.
Mhm.
And I said, or I think it was in 19, we had this float in
Mhm.
Corrales. And I said, you ought to look at the float. And they said, how did you do it?
Mhm.
And it was a mixture of people from all across.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
and
It's New Mexico. There's a
right.
mixture.
And
Yeah.
they said, well, how did you do it? And I kind of laid it out. And I said, I can help you with that if you want.
Mhm.
But they weren't interested.
Mhm.
They didn't want to do the work to open it up because when doing so, it meant that they would lose the power and control.
Yeah, they want the voice. They want the vote, but they don't always want the voice.
Right. Right. They want the vote. So how do you think that the Republican Party, if you're going to offer recommendations, let me go back.
Mhm.
You're in the
In a perfect world.
not in a perfect world,
Yeah.
but let's say now you got a place at the table.
Yeah.
How are you going to open it up?
Well, so again, I come from a music background. So what you do, so like in music, it's a situation. The label will give you here's $3,000. Let's just say use a number.
Right.
And if you can make $10,000 out of that, great. And so you do a little project, a single or whatever, great.
Right.
It's like, okay, what you did was great. Now we're going to give you $30,000. And if you can make 100,000 out of that, great. So basically, to me, it's very interesting that we won the primary with $9,000.
Right.
Right? And then it's like, imagine if they would have just gave us 90,000 to repeat what we did, or 900,000. So recognize success and let those people perpetuate the success. And I feel good leadership means sometimes knowing when to get out of the way. But also,
That's right.
and it's and I feel that there's certain elite leadership that doesn't know how to get out of the way.
Well, I think it has to do with number one is not wanting to lose that control.
Mhm.
And so what I mentioned in the monologue is the fact is that we've got people coming up and it's time to hand the reins off.
Well, and I'll tell you that I feel both parties are at fault for this, that they're forgetting there's three branches of government, that they treat a presidency way higher than they treat the Senate or the House.
Right.
When it's like, then you get stuck in this like, well, this president does this. Like, no, I'm running for legislation, Congress.
Right.
My job is to keep the president in line, whoever that may be.
Oh, I agree with that 100%.
And so when a party goes all in on a president from LBJ to Nixon to now, then everyone else has to like, okay, now they have to mitigate that.
Right.
So anyway.
So we're looking at the Republican Party.
Mhm.
We're a minority party
Mhm.
in the state. Independents, most young people, when they're registering as independents. How do the Republicans open it up? And so you went to events just like I did,
Mhm.
and how few young people are at Republican events?
Mhm.
You saw that.
Mhm.
How do we open it up to those independents,
Mhm.
reach out to them and say, we want your voice here in the Republican Party?
I think what the Democrats do well is they create little segments, of interest, so on and so forth. And I think what the Republican Party needs to do is to do the same thing, but more for business. They need to know that artists, their little segment has value. Mechanics, musicians, whatever that may be. And if they broke the economy down into little pockets and showed that they're interested in all those things in the economy, that would actually offset the social interest that the Democrats have, because I feel that the Republicans kind of go really top heavy for the economy interests, and they don't talk about the local economy enough and all the little parts of
Right,
that.
and I agree. I was the only one, I believe, that went to the All Indian Market
Mhm.
to go meet with folks.
Mhm.
That was one, and then two, I met with gallery owners in Santa Fe to hear the challenges that they have with federal legislation
Yeah,
that's hurting the art market in Santa Fe. Joel, we need to wrap this up.
okay.
Man, it's always good seeing
Yeah,
you.
it flew
Good
by.
chatting
Yeah,
with
thanks
you.
for having me. And we could have took any one of these topics and just talked about it for an
That's
hour.
right, and I agree with that. We'll get you back on another time.
I'm happy to come back.
Hopefully, I'll join you on no, I'll never join you on the rugby field.
No,
Those days are behind me.
Yeah.
And again, Joel, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate it.